The phone rang at 6:17. I know the exact time because I was standing in my new kitchen, watching the sunrise paint the Pacific Ocean in strokes of orange and violet. The light hit the polished quartz countertop, cool and solid under my palm. It was the first sunrise I'd watched in a decade that wasn't filtered through the haze of desert dust or the scratched plexiglass of a C-130. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. It was a perfect, peaceful quiet. Then the phone vibrated against the stone, a jarring intrusion. The caller ID read Dad. For a moment, I just stared at it. 8 years. 8 years of deployments, of sand-choked Christmases and birthdays spent on satellite phones with unreliable connections. 8 years of being the son who was out of sight, and therefore entirely out of mind. In all that time, I could count the number of calls he'd initiated on one hand, and each one had been a prelude to a request for information about my mother's distant relatives or a question about military discounts. Not once had the call been for me. I let it ring 3 times, a small test of intent. He didn't hang up. I pressed the green icon. Hello? Michael, son, we saw the pictures your aunt posted. My God, that house! His voice was booming, thick with a manufactured pride I'd never heard directed at me before. It was the voice he used for club members and business associates, not for family. It was a performance. Yeah, I just closed yesterday, I said, my voice flat. I watched a pelican dive into the shimmering water below my deck. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Your mother and I we're bursting. So proud of you, son. All that hard work. It really paid off. The phrase, all that hard work, hung in the air. He said it as if he'd been a witness to it, a coach on the sidelines. He had no concept of what it meant. He didn't know about the firefights, the 48-hour patrols, the bone-deep exhaustion of sleeping in full gear because you didn't know what the night would bring. He didn't know about the friends who didn't come home, whose memories I'd used as fuel to save every single dollar of combat pay. He saw a 4-bedroom house with an ocean view. That was the sum total of his understanding. Thanks, I managed. The word felt like swallowing sand. Listen, he said, the jovial tone shifting into something more practical, more purposeful. Your mother and I were talking, and your brother Kevin, you know, with the new baby and Jessica being so stressed. Things are tight for them in that little apartment. I knew where this was going. The muscles in my back and shoulders, trained to anticipate incoming threats, tightened into a solid wall of tension. The market is just brutal right now, he continued, a practiced sigh in his voice. And this big, beautiful place you've got, it just makes so much sense. We're so proud of you for building something for the family. For the family. The words echoed in the empty, cavernous great room behind me. A house I had purchased, alone, with money earned in places he couldn't imagine, was now a family project, a community asset. I didn't say anything. Silence was a tool I had learned to use effectively. It makes people uncomfortable. It makes them reveal their hand. He took my silence as agreement. So we were thinking, when can we move in? The question was so bald, so utterly devoid of shame, that it almost felt like a physical blow. It wasn't, can we visit? Or can we stay for a while to help you get settled? It was, when can we move in? A statement of intent disguised as a query. He spoke as if the deed to my house had his name on it, as if my sacrifice had always been part of his retirement plan. I looked out at the vast, indifferent ocean. The sun was fully up now, blindingly bright on the water's surface. For 8 years, they hadn't asked for anything because I had nothing they wanted. Now I did. Not relief. Clarity. I have to go, Dad, I said, my voice as calm and steady as it was during a radio check under fire. "I'll call you back." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call and set the phone down on the counter. The silence of the house rushed back in, but it was different now. It was no longer peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield, right before the first shot is fired. That was the moment I understood. My war wasn't over. It had just followed me home. Weeks earlier, I'd been sitting in a different kind of quiet, the sterile beige silence of a VA hospital room in San Diego. A piece of shrapnel had decided to make a permanent home in my left leg, and the surgeons had just spent 6 hours convincing it to leave. The recovery was a slow, grinding process of pain and physical therapy. I'd called my mother the day after the surgery. "Oh, Michael, that's terrible," she'd said, her voice distant, distracted. I could hear the television in the background, a game show by the sound of the cheerful, insistent music. "Are you okay?" "I will be. It's just a long road." I was fishing, and I knew it. Fishing for a word of comfort, an offer to visit, anything. "Well, you're the strong one," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a release of responsibility, a verbal pass. "You always figure it out. We're just so swamped right now. Your brother's baby shower is next weekend, and Jessica has me running all over town. You know how she is." I knew how Jessica was. My brother Kevin, the golden child, had married a woman who was his perfect match in entitlement and cosmetic charm. While I was re-enlisting for a tour in Afghanistan to get the deployment bonus that would become the foundation of my savings, Kevin was getting a business degree from a private university, funded entirely by my parents. When he graduated, they co-signed on a luxury SUV for him. When he got married, they paid for a lavish wedding I watched on a grainy video feed from a forward operating base. When he and Jessica wanted to start a business, a high-end dog grooming salon, my father cashed out some investments to give them the seed money. The business failed within a year, but there were no recriminations. Just sympathetic sighs and another loan to cover their debts. I, on the other hand, had paid for my own car at 16 with money from a summer job. When I wanted to go to college, my father sat me down with a ledger. "We can help with community college," he'd said, "but a 4-year school, that's on you, son. You need to be realistic." So I'd been realistic. I enlisted. The military offered a path. It promised structure, a paycheck, and the GI Bill. It promised that my success or failure would be my own. My parents had framed it as a noble, patriotic choice. They'd thrown me a small going-away barbecue where they talked loudly to their friends about their son, the soldier. It was good for their image. A blue-collar son to contrast with their white-collar one. It made them look grounded. Then I was gone, and the silence began. The first year was the hardest. I sent letters, emails. I called when I could. The responses were sporadic, brief. They were always busy. Kevin was rushing a fraternity. Kevin had a new girlfriend. Kevin's midterms were stressful. My life, a world away, was an abstraction to them. Distraction. An inconvenient, slightly worrying subplot in the grand narrative of Kevin's coming-of-age story. On my 21st birthday, I was on patrol outside Kandahar. My satellite phone finally got a signal around midnight, local time. I called home, hoping for a familiar voice. It went to voicemail. I left a message. "Hey, just calling to say hi. It's my birthday. Hope you're all doing well." They never called back. A few days later, I got an email from my mom. The subject line was, "Belated birthday." The body of the email was 2 sentences long. "Sorry we missed your call. Things are crazy. Kevin made the dean's list again. We took him out for a huge steak dinner to celebrate. Hope you're staying safe. Love, Mom." I remember staring at that email on the flickering screen of a ruggedized laptop in the comms tent. The air smelled of diesel fumes and body odor. Outside, The world was shades of brown and gray, and they were eating steak. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just deleted the email. I went back to my cot, cleaned my rifle, and mentally closed a door. That was the day I stopped expecting anything. I focused on my work. I became an exemplary soldier. I took every extra training, volunteered for every difficult assignment, and I saved my money, every single cent I could. My bank account became the only thing that felt truly mine. It was a measure of my survival, my discipline, my independence. It was my way out. Now, standing in the kitchen of the house that money had bought, the memory of that email was as clear as the view from my window. My father's words, "When can we move in?" were just a sequel to it. They weren't proud of me. They were proud of my property. I was not a son. I was an asset they had suddenly discovered, a forgotten stock that had unexpectedly matured. And they were here to cash in. The doorbell rang 2 days later. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I saw 3 familiar silhouettes. My father, my mother, and my brother Kevin. They hadn't called to say they were coming. They had just arrived. I opened the door. My father was beaming, arms spread wide as if to embrace the entire house. "There he is, the man of the hour!" My mother, Helen, fluttered past him, her eyes scanning the foyer, the living room, the high ceilings. "Oh, Michael, the pictures didn't do it justice. It's just magnificent." Kevin hung back, a smirk on his face. He was holding a small, yapping dog in his arms. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. "Nice place, bro." "Really? Something." They moved past me into the house as if they lived there, a tide of entitlement washing over my threshold. My father clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of performative affection that felt more like a claim of ownership. "Let's see the grand tour." For the next hour, I walked them through my home. It was a surreal experience. They didn't ask questions about me or my transition back to civilian life. They talked about the house as if it were a blank canvas for their own lives. "This room has the best light. It would be a perfect nursery for little Chloe," my mother said, standing in the guest bedroom that overlooked the garden. "We could put our king-size bed against this wall," my father announced in the master suite, measuring the space with his eyes. "Plenty of room for my armchair by the window." Kevin wandered onto the back deck, looking down at the sparkling blue pool. "We're definitely going to need to get a pool fence for Chloe, and maybe one of those big inflatable slides. She'd love that." They spoke in we's and hours. They were dividing up my life savings before my eyes, piece by piece. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else. I let them talk. I observed. I gathered intelligence. This was a reconnaissance mission. I needed to understand the enemy's position, their assumptions, their objectives. Their objective became clear when Jessica's SUV pulled into my driveway an hour later. She got out, shielding her eyes from the sun with a perfectly manicured hand, and surveyed the property like a conquering general. She didn't greet me. She walked straight to Kevin and kissed him. "Well, is it going to work?" she asked him, her voice loud enough for me to hear. "It's perfect," Kevin said, grinning. "Better than the pictures. We'll take the 2 rooms on the west side. They connect. One for us, one for the baby." Jessica finally turned her gaze on me. There was no warmth in it, just appraisal. "Michael, you'll need to clear out your things from those rooms. We'll have our stuff delivered on Friday." It wasn't a request. It was an order. I just nodded slowly. Friday. That night, after they'd finally left in a cloud of exhaust and self-satisfaction, leaving behind the lingering scent of my mother's perfume and the faint, unsettling indentation of their bodies on my sofa, I sat in the dark and made a decision. I had spent 8 years of my life following orders, operating within a strict chain of command. I understood procedure, I respected protocol, and I knew, with a certainty, that chilled me to the bone, that if I didn't establish my own protocol now, I would become an occupied territory. The next morning, their assault began in earnest. My mother called with a list of groceries she needed me to buy for the house. My father emailed me a link to a 70-inch television he'd like to see mounted in the living room. Jessica texted me a photo of a crib from a Restoration Hardware catalog with the caption, "This one." The X. I responded to none of it. I let the calls go to voicemail. I let the texts sit unread. My silence, which they had once taken for granted, was now a source of agitation. Around noon, my father called again. I answered this time. "Michael, didn't you get our messages?" he asked, a hint of irritation in his voice. "I got them," I said. "Well?" "Your mother's waiting on those groceries, and I need a measurement for the TV mount." "This isn't a good time," I said calmly. "I have appointments all day." "Appointments? What's more important than getting your family settled?" The question was so revealing. My life, my schedule, my needs, they were irrelevant. Their comfort was the mission objective. "I'll have to call you back," I said, and hung up before he could argue. The appointment I had was with a physical therapist, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Maria, who'd worked with hundreds of wounded vets. She pushed me until my legs screamed in protest, her voice a constant, firm presence. "Again, Sergeant, you don't get strong by stopping when it hurts. You get strong by pushing through it." As I lay on the table afterward, my leg throbbing, I thought about her words. I had always pushed through the pain, the loneliness, the neglect. I had mistaken endurance for strength. I had accepted their terms, their narrative that I was the strong one who didn't need anything. But true strength wasn't about silently absorbing punishment. It was about having the power to make it stop. That evening, I hit my lowest point. I was home, icing my leg, when a moving van pulled up across the street. I watched as a young couple, probably around my age, directed the movers. They laughed, held hands, and argued playfully about where a sofa should go. They were building a life together, a partnership. I was in my own home, a fortress I had built, preparing to repel a boarding party of my own family. The loneliness was a physical weight in my chest. I felt the familiar pull of capitulation. Maybe it would be easier to just give them what they wanted. Let them have the rooms, the pool, the life I'd built. Maybe the price of peace was my own surrender. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Mikey, is that you?" The voice was rough, familiar. It took me a second to place it. "Marcus? Marcus Jones?" "The one and only, man," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. Sergeant Marcus Jones. We'd served together in my first tour. He'd lost his right foot to an IED. I'd been the one to apply the tourniquet, the one who kept him talking until the medevac arrived. We hadn't spoken in years. "How did you get this number?" I asked, sitting up. "Still got contacts, man. Heard you were back stateside, got out honorably. Just wanted to see how you were doing. Heard you got banged up on your last tour." The simple, direct concern in his voice was so alien, so unexpected, that it almost broke me. I'm okay. Recovering." "Yeah, recovery's a bitch," he said with a dark chuckle. "Listen, man, I'm not far from you. Over in Oceanside. Me and the wife, we're having a barbecue this weekend. You should come. Meet the kids. It's nothing fancy, just burgers and beers, but it'd be good to see you, brother." Brother. He used the word, and it meant something. It wasn't a placeholder. It was a statement of fact, sealed in shared experience and mutual respect. Yeah, okay, Marcus, I'd like that," I said, my voice thick. "Good. Now, you sound like crap. What's really going on?" And for the first time, I told someone. I told him everything. The years of silence, the phone call, The uninvited arrival, the demands, the moving van full of their expectations. I laid it all out, the words spilling out of me in a torrent. I expected him to be shocked, to offer platitudes. He was silent for a long moment when I finished. Then he said, "So, they're trying to take your home, after everything. Classic." "I don't know what to do," I admitted, the confession feeling like a failure. "Yes, you do," Marcus said, his voice firm, the voice of a sergeant again. "You're a soldier, Mikey. You've been faced with an unauthorized occupation of your primary base of operations. You don't negotiate with the insurgents. You secure the perimeter. You establish rules of engagement. And you evict them. Period." His words were a splash of ice water. He wasn't looking at it through the messy, complicated lens of family dynamics. He saw it for what it was, a tactical problem. "They're my family," I said weakly. "No," he corrected me gently. "Family are the people who have your six, even when you don't ask them to. These people, they're just relatives. There's a difference. Now you need a plan. You get a lawyer. You document everything, every text, every call. You change the locks. This is your ground, Mikey. Don't give it up." That conversation was the turning point. It was the moment clarity hardened into resolve. Marcus, a man I hadn't seen in almost a decade, had offered me more genuine support in a 10-minute phone call than my blood relatives had in my entire adult life. He represented what family should be, and his simple, unwavering loyalty threw their selfish opportunism into stark, unforgivable relief. The next morning, I began my operation. My military training kicked in, a familiar and comforting framework. The objective? Reclaim my home and my life. Phase 1. Intelligence gathering and fortification. I started with a simple search of public records online. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. My father had refinanced their modest suburban home twice in the last 5 years. There were also 2 liens against the property from contractors. I then searched for my brother's name. I found the public filing for his failed business, a trail of debt and defaults. And then I found the smoking gun, a recent civil suit. A lender had sued both Kevin and my father as the cosigner for defaulting on a massive business loan. The judgment had been entered against them 2 months ago. They were broke. Worse than broke. They were in a financial death spiral. This wasn't about wanting to be a happy, multi-generational family under one roof. This was a desperate escape from the consequences of their own irresponsibility. My house wasn't a preference. It was their only lifeboat, and they were prepared to throw me overboard to climb into it. I saved every document to a secure cloud drive, labeling each one with dates and case numbers. I went through my phone and took screenshots of every entitled text from Jessica, every demanding email from my father. I saved the voicemails. I created a digital file, a dossier of my own family's betrayal, organized with cold, methodical precision. The file name was simple: Operation Homecoming. Phase 2 was fortification. I called a locksmith and had all the exterior locks replaced. I installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras covering every angle of the property's exterior. All perfectly legal. The system came with an app. I could now watch every approach to my home from my phone. I felt the familiar comfort of a secured perimeter. Phase 3 was seeking professional counsel. I didn't want a bulldog litigator. I wanted a strategist. I found a lawyer who specialized in real estate and tenancy law, a sharp, older woman named Ms. Alvarez. I sat in her sterile, quiet office and laid out the facts, presenting my file of documents. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked at the printout of the lawsuit against my father and brother. "They're not just coming for a free ride, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice crisp. They're looking for a place to live where their creditors can't touch them. They can't lien a property they don't own. So what do? I asked. They're planning on having furniture delivered on Friday. First, we establish their legal status, she said, tapping a pen on her desk. Right now, they are guests. Guests can have their invitation revoked at any time. If they refuse to leave, they become trespassers. However, if they receive mail here, or move in furniture, or stay for a certain period, they could try to claim tenancy rights. That makes things much more complicated. We must ensure that never happens. She outlined a plan. It was clean, efficient, and devoid of emotion. It was perfect. We will draft a formal letter, she explained. It will state in no uncertain terms that you are the sole owner of the property. It will welcome them as guests for short-term, pre-arranged visits. Only. It will explicitly state that they are not permitted to move in, establish residence, or have mail or property delivered to the address. We will send it via certified mail to their current address. This creates a legal paper trail. It removes all ambiguity. And what about Friday? I asked, when they show up with a truck. You will not be there, she said firmly. You will not engage. You will have a copy of this letter and a copy of your deed taped to your front door. You will also have a notice from a private security company stating that the property is under surveillance and trespassers will be prosecuted. If they attempt to force entry, you will call the police. You let the system do the work. You, Mr. Hayes, are simply the rightful owner of a property, protecting your investment. I left her office feeling lighter. The fog of guilt and obligation was beginning to burn away, replaced by the cold, clear light of a strategic plan. I was no longer a son caught in a family drama. I was a landowner executing a legal right. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I went to the barbecue at Marcus's house. His home was small, loud, and filled with life. His wife gave me a hug like she'd known me for years. His kids climbed on me like a jungle gym. We ate burnt burgers and drank cheap beer, and I felt more at home in his crowded, chaotic backyard than I ever had in my parents' meticulously kept house. I told him the plan. He just nodded, a grim smile on his face. Good, he said. Hold the line, Mikey. On Friday morning, I put the plan into action. I taped the notice from the security company and a waterproof envelope containing the letter from Ms. Alvarez and a copy of my deed to the front door. I set the security system. Then I got in my car and drove down the coast to a hotel Marcus had recommended. Around 11 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from my security app, Motion, detected in the driveway. I opened the feed. There it was, a U-Haul truck, followed by my brother's SUV. I watched as my father, mother, Kevin, and Jessica got out. Their body language was confident, proprietary. They walked up to the front door laughing about something, then they stopped. I watched in crystal clear high definition as my father ripped the envelope from the door. He tore it open, the four of them huddled together, reading the letter. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. I saw the confusion morph into disbelief, then into pure, unadulterated rage. Jessica jabbed a finger at the paper, her face contorted. Kevin kicked one of my porch steps. My mother just stood there, her hand over her mouth. My father looked directly into the camera lens above the door. It was as if he was staring right at me. His face was purple. He pulled out his phone. A second later, my phone started ringing. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. Then the texts started, a barrage of fury and indignation. From Dad, "What the hell is this? A lawyer? After everything we've done for you. Open this door right now." From Mom, "Michael, please, this is a misunderstanding. Your father is very upset. We're your family." From Kevin, "You son of a bitch. You were always a selfish bastard." and from Jessica. "You will regret this." I watched them on the camera feed for another hour. They yelled. They paced. Kevin tried to force a window open, which triggered the alarm. A piercing siren split the quiet, coastal air. I saw their panic. A few minutes later, a patrol car from the private security firm I'd hired pulled into the driveway. A uniformed officer got out, calm and professional. I watched the entire exchange. My family, so used to getting their way, tried to argue, to charm, to intimidate. The officer was unmoved. He pointed to the documents, to the sign, and then to their truck. He stayed there until the U-Haul rumbled away and my brother's SUV peeled out of the driveway, leaving tire marks on my pristine concrete. Then silence. The perimeter was secure. The aftermath was a storm of voicemails and angry messages from extended family members who had only been fed one side of the story. I was selfish. I was cruel. I was ungrateful. I had abandoned my family in their time of need. The words that would have once crippled me with guilt now felt like distant, irrelevant noise. They were firing blindly, their ammunition useless against the armor of the truth. I returned to my house that evening. It was quiet, just as it had been that first morning. But this was a different kind of quiet. It was an earned peace, a reclaimed territory. I walked through the rooms, my rooms, and felt the weight of their expectations lift from the very foundation of the building. This was my sanctuary. I had defended it. A week later, a package arrived. It was from Marcus. Inside was a simple, framed photo. It was of our squad, taken just before a mission. We were all young, grimy, and exhausted, but we were smiling. We looked like a family. Tucked into the frame was a note. It said, "This is family. Don't you ever forget it. M." I placed the photo on the mantel in my living room. It was the first personal item I'd put on display. It was a reminder. The final confrontation happened not with a bang, but with a whimper. Ms. Alvarez arranged a formal mediation. They had, through their own lawyer, demanded it, claiming I had made promises to them. They wanted money. They wanted a settlement for their emotional distress and the financial hardship my actions had caused. We met in a sterile conference room. They sat on one side of the polished table, a united front of simmering resentment. I sat on the other with Ms. Alvarez beside me. My father spoke first, his voice dripping with wounded pride. He talked about my childhood, about the sacrifices they'd made. He painted a picture of a loving family that had been shattered by my inexplicable cruelty. When he was finished, Ms. Alvarez didn't respond to his emotional appeal. She simply slid a folder across the table. "In this folder," she said, her voice even and calm, "you will find copies of the judgment against you and your son for the defaulted loan. You will find public records of the liens against your home. You will find a complete financial workup that shows you are insolvent. You will also find a log of every unanswered call and email my client made over an 8-year period, juxtaposed with a log of your financial support for your other son." She paused, letting the weight of the words fill the room. There was no promise of a home. There was a desperate attempt to escape financial ruin by seizing an asset that does not belong to you. My client is not here to negotiate. He is here to inform you that any further contact with him, his property, or his associates will be treated as harassment. We have a file prepared for a restraining order should it become necessary. They were stunned into silence. Their narrative, the one where they were the victims and I was the villain, had been dismantled with cold, hard facts. There was no room for argument. Kevin was the first to break. "So that's it? You're just going to throw us away?" he sputtered, his face red. I looked at my brother, the boy who had gotten everything I hadn't, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not even pity. Just a vast, empty distance. "You threw me away years ago," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the table. I just stopped waiting for you to come back and pick me up. My mother started to cry, soft, performative sobs. How can you be so cold, Michael? You mistake discipline for coldness, I replied, standing up. I learned it a long time ago. You don't survive by being emotional. You survive by being prepared. My life is now my own. I suggest you find a way to manage yours. And with that, I walked out. I didn't look back. Life found a new rhythm after that. A quiet, steady beat. I continued my physical therapy, pushing through the pain until it gradually subsided into a dull ache, and then, finally, into a memory. I learned to walk without a limp. I started a small consulting business from home, advising companies on security logistics. My military experience, once a source of trauma, became a valuable asset in a new context. The house became a home. Marcus and his family came over often. We filled the rooms with the sounds of children's laughter and the smell of barbecue. He helped me build a new fence, and we drank a beer on the deck, looking out at the ocean, our ocean. I learned that family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up. It's about who has your six, not because you have something they want, but because you are someone they love. My parents and brother were relatives, a biological fact. Marcus was my family, a chosen truth. Sometimes I think about that first phone call, the one that started it all. My father's booming false pride, his casual, devastating question. He thought he was talking to the same quiet, accommodating boy he had sent off to war years ago. The boy who was conditioned to accept the scraps they threw him and call it love. He didn't realize that the man who came back was different. The military taught me many things: discipline, strategy, resilience. But the most important lesson was this: you cannot hold a position you are not willing to defend. My home, my peace, my self-respect. These were my positions, and I would not surrender them. Not anymore. It's a strange and often painful journey, learning to draw a boundary where a welcome mat used to be. Many of us are taught that family is unconditional, that obligation is endless. But what happens when that obligation only flows in one direction? What do you do when the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor are the ones creating the storm? You have to become your own anchor. You have to choose your own crew. I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever had to be the strong one to the point of breaking? Tell me about it in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this story resonates, please subscribe. There's strength in knowing you're not fighting alone.